3 weeks ago, Claire Morgan personally signed over everything to the man who was about to become her ex-husband. The 3-story townhouse, the black Range Rover, control of the Whitmore Hospitality Group restaurant empire, and everything Charleston high society still liked to call a life worth envying. 47 seconds later, the victorious smile on Graham Whitmore's face vanished, as if someone had ripped away the velvet curtain hiding the truth. The family courtroom that day was flooded with a cold, flat light, the kind of light that made every face look sharper, crueler. Claire sat upright at the petitioner's table, both hands resting neatly on a cream-colored file folder, calm enough that anyone could mistake her for a woman who had given up. The navy dress she wore was not expensive. The low heels had lasted several seasons, and her hair was pinned into a simple twist at the nape of her neck. Nothing about her signaled power. That was exactly why most people in that room made the same mistake. In the row behind her, Patricia Whitmore sat like a statue carved out of pride. That woman had never liked Claire. In Patricia's eyes, Claire was just a girl with a gentle face, a respectable education, and a family background too ordinary to step into the Whitmore name as an equal. For years, Patricia had comforted herself with the thought that at least Claire knew her place, knew how to stay in the background, knew how to let her sun shine. Today, watching Claire quietly sign every page, Patricia felt that belief had been proven one more time. She pitied Claire in an elegant way, the way people glance at something that used to be fashionable and now looks dated. Sitting beside Patricia was Sabrina Vale, 28 years old, with smooth skin, wine-red lips, and a white satin dress that hugged her body. Sabrina adjusted her hair and lifted her phone with just enough skill to catch her best angle inside the courtroom. She did not think she looked ridiculous. In Sabrina's mind, this was the morning of a legal replacement. Claire would be erased from the picture. Sabrina would step into the light. What she did not know yet was that the picture itself had already rotted from the inside. And Graham Whitmore sat directly across from Claire, with the easy confidence of a man who believed he was always the smartest person in any room. He was 42, tall, polished, clean-shaven, with a steel watch flashing cold light at his wrist. His charcoal suit fit him perfectly, making him look as if he were still whole, still in control, still the owner of the 3 most talked-about dining spots in the city. His attorney, Victor Lang, kept turning over the pages in the file, but Graham barely looked down. He was looking at Claire. And in that look there was pity and contempt. Graham truly believed Claire had no idea what she was signing. He had lived too long inside a marriage where every bill, every password, every important decision passed through him first. He had grown used to thinking that his wife was only capable of scheduling their son's vaccinations, choosing table linens for dinner parties, and smiling at the right moment when guests arrived. A woman like that, in Graham's logic, could never possibly see through debt structures, personal guarantees, or the layers of legal paperwork wrapped around the empire he had built. What he did not know was that Claire understood ledgers faster than she understood people. And for the last 3 years, she had learned how to read collapse the way people read music. The judge asked for final confirmation. Her voice was firm, even, emotionless. Claire answered briefly. She understood that she was giving up any claim to a share of the house, the vehicle, the restaurant group, the liquor licenses, the furniture, the investment accounts tied to the marriage, and all related assets. She also confirmed that she had been given enough time to review the agreement with her attorney. Victor Lang shifted slightly in his seat. He was the first person in the room to feel that something was not entirely aligned. Not because he had uncovered the secret, but because Claire's calm was too smooth, too clean, too unbroken. People who are truly cornered usually carry something in their eyes: fear, bitterness, humiliation, grief. Claire carried none of that. She looked like a still lake, so still it was suspicious. But Graham had spent years ignoring anything that did not reinforce his own confidence. He leaned toward Victor and murmured that everything should be finished before lunch. His voice was light, almost cheerful. Patricia caught part of it and approved. Sabrina heard enough to smile to herself, already imagining a victory dinner at some harborside restaurant where she would sit in a chair that had never belonged to her and still believe it soon would. Claire never turned toward the gallery. She did not need to look to know what they were thinking. In that moment, she understood each of them perfectly. Patricia was thinking that at last her useless daughter-in-law had remembered where she belonged. Sabrina was thinking that the past had finally folded itself away to make room for her future. Graham was thinking that he was about to shrug off an old, worn-out marriage without paying the price he deserved to pay. Only Monica Hale, Claire's attorney, was not thinking at all. Monica was waiting. She sat beside Claire with a posture as straight as a blade resting quietly in its sheath. She was not looking at Graham or Patricia or Sabrina. She was looking at the file. More precisely, she knew there was one place inside that file that would change the breathing rhythm of the entire room. There was no triumph on Claire's face. What separated her from everyone else was not satisfaction. It was finality. She had not come here to win more. She had come here to cut herself loose from a machine that was already burning from the inside, from a man who had turned arrogance into his only language, from parties where she was always seated closer to the kitchen than the head table, from the nights her son sat by the window, holding a book and a question in his eyes. Noah was not in court that day. He was with Jenna Brooks, Claire's old friend, a few blocks away. Before leaving, Claire had kissed his forehead and told him the two of them would get ice cream that afternoon, rain or not. Noah had nodded and hugged his navy baseball cap tightly against his chest. He did not understand the legal details, but he was perceptive enough to know that today was a day his mother needed to walk through alone. And Claire had carried that image with her into the courtroom, the way someone hides a small source of warmth inside their palm in winter. The court clerk kept reading. Each clause landed in the room in the same steady tone, like gears turning. The townhouse, the Range Rover, controlling shares, business licenses, rights and related benefits. Claire signed. Graham signed. Sabrina curved her lip. Patricia exhaled softly. Then Victor Lang turned one more page. His hand froze so subtly it was almost invisible. Just one small beat. But Monica saw it. And Claire saw it too. Page 41 lay there in silence, like a knife hidden inside legal language. Graham still had not noticed. He was lowering his pen to the final signature line with the durable confidence of a man who had never believed any door in the world could slam shut in his face. He thought his life was still a luxury restaurant, where he chose the menu, summoned the server, and decided who would be handed the bill. He did not know that in that exact moment, the room had already stopped being his stage. And Claire, the woman everyone had dismissed as the faintest presence there, was the only one who knew exactly what would happen the instant that pen left the page. 3 years earlier, it had also been Claire who opened a door Graham had always assumed would stay locked. It was a rainy night. A fireproof bag hidden behind the liquor cabinet, a stack of documents that had never been meant for her eyes. And from that moment on, their marriage stopped being the story of love slowly dying. It became the story of a woman so underestimated that no one realized she was learning, in silence, how to take back every last inch of power in her own life. The courtroom remained silent. Outside the glass doors, Charleston sunlight poured over the white courthouse steps. Claire drew in one slow breath. Then the past opened. 3 years before Claire ever learned about the fireproof bag hidden behind the liquor cabinet, Her life was wrapped in a kind of beauty that made outsiders see nothing but something to admire. The Whitmore house stood on a tree-lined street near Charleston's historic district, where curved iron balconies held the homes like the proud arms of the past. Mornings there usually began with honey-colored sunlight sliding through the curtains, the smell of freshly roasted coffee, and the sound of Graham's leather shoes echoing across polished wood floors. He belonged to that setting perfectly. Tall, sharp, always arriving as though the light had chosen him first. People looked at Graham and saw ambition in a tailored suit. They saw confidence that knew exactly when to smile. They saw a man born to stand in the middle of a crowded room, lift a glass, and make everyone believe whatever story he was telling. Claire had believed it more than anyone. Years earlier, before she carried the Whitmore name, she had been Claire Morgan, a revenue analyst for a coastal hotel group. She was not the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately drew attention. She was never loud. She did not know how to perform herself. She had a gentle face, an even voice, and eyes that always lingered a little longer than everyone else's on the details no one noticed. She was good with numbers the way some people were good with weather. One glance and she could tell which sky was about to break open. In revenue reports, she saw cracks long before anyone else realized the wall was starting to give. That was what had once drawn Graham to her. In the early days of their relationship, he used to say Claire made him feel steady, that in a world full of people who talked too much and promised too much, Claire had something far rarer: certainty. He called her his harbor, the only place where he did not have to perform. Claire had believed him, partly because she wanted to, partly because Graham knew exactly which words to use to touch the softest parts of someone. After the wedding, things did not change all at once. They changed the way the tide rises. Slowly, gently, almost politely. At first, it was just a few things that sounded reasonable. Let me handle the kitchen renovation loan. You've had a long week. Don't worry about the tax paperwork. You're great with numbers, but business is different from spreadsheets. Let me take care of it. Claire did not see it as power being taken from her. She thought it was a division of roles. One person out in the world, one person keeping the house warm and lit. There were evenings when she stood in the kitchen, listening to Graham in the living room talk about a new contract, a new investor, the possibility of opening another location, and she felt proud, as though his success ran through her bloodstream too. At one time, it really had felt that way. At least, she thought it had. Whitmore Hospitality Group kept growing. What had started as an upscale seafood restaurant near the harbor became a wine bar with live jazz on Friday nights. Then, a wedding venue outside the city, where strings of lights draped beneath old oak trees were rented at such outrageous prices, people were willing to call it romantic instead of extravagant. Local papers began writing about Graham. His photo appeared in city magazines, smiling beside marble bar tops, sleeves rolled just enough to look busy while still looking elegant. People loved stories like that. A man building an empire out of taste, instinct, and charm. And little by little, Claire disappeared from the caption. She was still present everywhere. At menu tastings with important friends, at charity dinners in Patricia's house, in Christmas photos tucked inside ivory holiday cards. But her role changed in a way only the person living inside it could really feel. She was no longer someone people asked. She became someone they informed. No longer a voice in the room. She became the one who made sure everyone else's voice could be heard smoothly. Patricia Whitmore saw that change and was pleased by it. She never openly insulted Claire. Patricia was not the kind of woman who dirtied her hands with blunt cruelty. She was subtler than that. She praised Claire for being good at keeping house in a way that made it sound like a compliment. She told guests Graham was lucky to have a wife who was not too ambitious. She smiled and said the smartest women were the ones who knew how to take exactly the right step back so their husbands could go farther. Every time Claire heard it, she smiled politely. But inside her, something tightened, very softly, very thinly, like the edge of a sheet of paper touched by flame before it fully caught. When Noah was born, that tightening grew larger. Claire loved her son from the first instant, in the kind of way that needed no language. A kind of love that could keep a woman awake all night just to watch her child's chest rise and fall, and feel both terrified and grateful that such a tiny life was breathing in her arms. Graham was happy too. In those first few weeks, he truly seemed like a different man, taking pictures, holding the baby, buying things, talking about the future in a voice that had softened by half. He even said Noah had taught him what family really meant. Then work called his name, and Graham always answered work the way a believer answers something sacred. When Claire was getting ready to return to the office after maternity leave, Graham sat across from her in the kitchen, his voice calm, his reasoning tidy, his eyes gentle enough to make resistance difficult. Noah needs his mother at home in these early years. I'm opening another location. I make enough for us. If you go back to work just to pay someone else to raise him, what's the point? It was the kind of sentence that sounded caring while already containing the decision inside it. Claire knew that. Part of her knew it very clearly. She also knew how much she missed her work. Missed the feeling of finding an inconsistency in a report and fixing it before it became a disaster. Missed the feeling of her mind being used the way it was meant to be used. But Noah was still so small. And back then, Graham still knew how to take her hand while he spoke. He still knew how to make it seem as though he was sacrificing something with her. And Claire, who had grown up in a house where her parents' arguments had once become so vicious that dishes shattered into sharp pieces on the floor, chose peace over confrontation. She said yes. One short word. But sometimes one short word can change the shape of an entire life. The first months at home with Noah were not without happiness. There was so much happiness. His first laugh, his tiny hand wrapping around her finger, the sweet milky smell in his hair, the afternoons when sunlight spilled across the living room rug in patches of gold while Noah slept on her chest. Claire had never regretted being beside him in those moments. What exhausted her was not Noah. It was the way the rest of her had begun to be treated as though it no longer mattered. The supplemental credit card Graham gave her had a limit just high enough for groceries, the pharmacy, school supplies, and children's birthday gifts. Anything bigger, he said, just text me first and I'll transfer the money. Statements no longer came to the house. Graham managed their joint savings account. He changed the password to the tax portal because, he said, it was too complicated for Claire to remember. His office on the second floor was always locked at night, and the key gradually became something more unpleasant than a small piece of metal. That door did not just keep Claire away from the files inside. It kept her from standing as an equal inside her own home. Graham thought he was being reasonable. In his mind, he was not controlling. He was protecting. He was carrying the heavy part, shielding his wife from the uglier side of money, taxes, staffing, interest rates, contracts. He truly believed he was doing the right thing. The people around him only reinforced that belief. Successful men are often praised as decisive in the very places where women would be called controlling. Claire had no proof for what she was living through, no clean name for it yet. She only had the growing feeling that she was becoming smaller beside a man who kept growing larger in the eyes of the world. Now and then, late at night after Noah had fallen asleep, she would open her old laptop and take on a few small freelance jobs from Lydia Monroe, her former boss. Reviewing revenue for a boutique hotel, tracking inconsistencies in room reports. The projects were small enough that Graham hardly noticed, or if he did notice, he only gave a faint dismissive smile and said if doing those little things for fun made her happy, that was fine. Claire never argued, but every time she saw the numbers line up neatly on her screen, she felt a small part of herself return. As though, beneath all the dust covering those years, a part of who she had been was still breathing. Graham saw those projects as hobbies. Patricia was even worse. She called them little occupations for educated women. Claire heard the dismissal wrapped inside every polite word. She did not answer. She answered fewer and fewer things like that. From the outside, her silence looked like surrender, but somewhere deeper, it had already begun to change into something else. At that point, Claire still had no idea what horrifying financial truth was sitting just a few steps away from her on the second floor. All she knew was that inside that picture-perfect house, some doors were always closed. Some conversations were always cut short the moment she walked in. Some messages were turned face down too quickly. Some money disappeared from the rhythm of daily life and was never explained. And a little boy named Noah was growing up in that house, believing his father was the strongest man in the world, while his mother was the one who knew how to make everything safe. Claire did not understand the full shape of the war that was coming, but somewhere inside her, instinct had already started to wake. Then Noah got a little older, and he was the first one who made it impossible for Claire to keep calling those cracks something small. Children have a strange way of exposing the truth. They do not analyze. They do not rationalize. They do not know how to place their pain into neat, polite drawers and close them the way adults do. They simply wait, simply believe, and then simply grieve in the most primal way possible. That was how it began for Noah Whitmore on an October afternoon, when the Charleston sunlight slanted across the living room windows, and the little boy sat on the front steps, sneakers smudged with dust, both hands wrapped tightly around a red baseball. Graham had promised he would come home early to take him to his first practice. Claire had not reminded him. The teacher had not sent a message. Graham had volunteered the promise himself over breakfast, while knotting his tie and bending down to smooth Noah's hair with the kind of gesture that made any outsider think devoted father. "Tonight I'm taking you, buddy. I'll be standing at the fence watching you hit." Noah's whole face had lit up. He repeated that promise all day as if he were holding a precious piece of candy inside his chest. While Claire folded laundry, Noah ran back and forth between the kitchen and the living room, asking her again and again if Dad was really coming. Claire smiled and said he probably was, but deep inside, she had already felt that familiar, shapeless ache. At 6 o'clock, Graham was not home. At 6:15, Noah was still sitting by the door, spine straight, ears tuned to every car that turned onto their street. At 6:30, Claire called Graham. Voicemail. At 6:45, practice began. Noah did not cry right away. That was what hurt Claire more. He just sat there, turning the ball slowly in his hands, eyes fixed on the window, as if a little more patience might make his father appear. Children believe in delays longer than adults do. They have not yet learned that some people simply do not come, no matter how gently they made the promise. At last, Claire knelt in front of him, tying Noah's shoelaces more slowly than necessary to hide the anger rising hot in her chest. She told him the two of them could still go. They could still catch the last few innings. Noah nodded, but when he stood up, the excitement from that morning had already been left behind somewhere on the front step. At the field, the other children ran like little arrows across the grass. Parents stood along the fence holding coffee, calling out their children's names, laughing when a ball flew wide, clapping when someone made an awkward hit. Claire stood there alone, her hand turning cold around Noah's water bottle. She could feel the empty space beside her, larger than it should have been. Noah could feel it too. Every time he looked back toward the fence, his eyes scanned for a familiar figure who was not there. Graham texted just as practice was ending. "Sorry, got stuck with investors. I'll take him next time." Claire stared at the screen for a long time. In her mind, a door closed without making a sound, not because Graham had missed one practice, because he thought a message like that could stitch up a tear in his son's heart. Because to Graham, every absence could be postponed until later, as if Noah's childhood were an object that could be left waiting on a shelf until it was convenient to return to. That night, Noah ate less than usual. When Claire read to him before bed, he lay still, eyes fixed on the ceiling, then suddenly asked in a tiny voice if Daddy liked watching him play baseball. Claire froze for one heartbeat. There was no way to answer a question like that fully without adding pain to it. She stroked his hair and told him Daddy was busy, but that did not mean he was not important. The moment she said it, Claire knew she was telling half a lie, and the other half cut into her like the edge of paper. After that, the moments came more often. A poetry reading at school Graham promised to stop by for, only to disappear because of an important phone call. An evening when Noah put on his train pajamas, hugged his pirate book, and waited on the sofa for his father to come home and read to him, then fell asleep with the book pressed tightly against his chest. A Sunday dinner where Graham sat directly across from his son, but spent the whole meal checking email, nodding vaguely while Noah excitedly talked about the hermit crab his class was keeping. Claire began to realize that Noah's sadness was no longer passing through him. It was settling inside him, thin as dust, but adding a layer every day. She saw it in the way Noah stopped asking so often when his father would be home, in the way he stopped showing Graham his drawings after getting nothing but distracted nods a few times too many, in the way hope slowly turned into caution. That was what hurt a mother's heart more than tears ever could. The moment a child begins teaching himself to expect less so he will not be disappointed, he has been forced to grow up in a place where no one should have to grow up that early. Noah's teacher was the first person to say out loud what Claire had already felt, but had not yet named. After pickup, the teacher gently held Claire back, her voice soft as if afraid of hurting someone. Lately, Noah seems anxious when he has to read aloud in class. Sometimes he gets stuck right at the beginning of a sentence, like he's afraid he'll say it wrong. But when he's with one or two close friends, he does much better. Claire stood still in the school hallway, surrounded by crayon drawings of suns, ships, and palm trees. The smell of glue and fresh paper floated in the air. She nodded, thanked the teacher, but by the time she reached the car, her hand was gripping the keys so tightly it hurt. Noah was not just sad. He was carrying the tension inside his body. A few weeks later, during a meeting with the school counselor, Claire sat and listened as she explained how children respond to unstable environments. Children do not need to witness screaming matches in order to be wounded. They only need to live in a place with too many broken promises, too much cold silence, too much pressure to read the moods of adults in order to feel safe. The body learns vigilance on its own. The counselor spoke calmly, never accusing Graham, never trying to shove Claire into a crisis, but each sentence landed in Claire's chest like a heavy pebble. She understood then. Their house was beautiful. Dinner still had enough dishes. Family photos still looked polished. There was no smashing, no violent shouting the way there had been in Claire's childhood. But that did not mean Noah was growing up safe. A home can be very quiet and still make a child anxious if love always comes after meeting schedules, after phone calls, after the ego of a man who refuses to see himself clearly. Graham saw everything differently. In his own mind, he was doing exactly what every successful man was supposed to do: earning, expanding, networking, securing the future. Every time Claire said Noah was hurt when his father broke a promise, Graham reacted with the irritation of a man pulled away from important work to hear something small. He did not yell. He did not need to. He would just exhale, rub the bridge of his nose, and say Noah needed to toughen up. Children could not always be allowed to orbit their own feelings. He was building the foundation for that boy's life. Someday he would understand. Claire grew sick of hearing that phrase, someday. In Graham's mouth, the word always sounded like a promissory note used to pay off the present. Someday Noah would understand. Someday Claire would be grateful. Someday all of Graham's sacrifices would be proven worthwhile. But childhood does not live in someday. It lives in each evening, each promise, each empty space at the baseball fence. And Noah had already started learning how to count those empty spaces. One early winter evening, Claire was folding towels in the laundry room when Noah walked in holding a sheet of paper colored with crayons. He offered it to her with that small hesitation children have when they are not yet sure whether what they made will matter to an adult. Claire sat down beside him. On the paper were 3 figures: a woman in a blue dress, a dark-haired little boy smiling, and a taller figure standing near the edge of the page, drawn in a few gray lines. No eyes, no mouth, just a shadow. "Who is this, sweetheart?" Noah answered right away, as if the answer were obvious. "That's Dad. He's usually near the door." The sentence was so simple, Claire almost forgot how to breathe. She folded the drawing carefully and hid it in the drawer of her nightstand after Noah fell asleep. Not because she was ashamed, but because she knew if she looked at that paper one more time, something inside her would change forever. That night, she lay beside Graham in their wide bed, listening to him breathe evenly, his phone still face down on the table beside him. And for the first time in years, Claire stopped thinking that she was only trying to save her marriage. She began thinking about something else. That maybe the peace she had clung to for so long was only a beautiful curtain draped over absence. That a mother could not keep calling it a small thing when her son was learning to love less in order to hurt less. That if she did not open her eyes now, Noah would grow up believing that love meant waiting by the window for someone who never came. A few days later, Graham missed another night at home. The reason was a menu tasting for a group of new investors. Claire did not argue. She simply wrote the date on the back of a grocery receipt lying on the kitchen counter. Then she added a few short words so she would not forget. Promised. Did not come. Noah waited. Could not sleep again. That same night, as she passed the second-floor office and saw the door shut as always, Claire stopped longer than usual. Behind that door were schedules, contracts, spreadsheets, statements, everything Graham had always said she did not need to understand. Before, Claire would have kept walking. She would have told herself it was not worth it. She would have gone downstairs, washed the glasses, turned off the lights, held her son, and called that life. But not that night. That night, for the first time, Claire stood in front of the locked door and realized she was no longer afraid of what was behind it. She was afraid of only one thing: that she would find out too late. That thought stayed with Claire for days afterward, like a thin shard of glass beneath the skin, not large enough to bring her down all at once, but sharp enough that every movement reminded her it was still there. She began to pay closer attention. Not the dramatic kind of attention people give when they are ready to tear a house apart in jealousy or rage. Claire did not do that. She observed with the cold patience of someone who had spent years reading small signals before they became disasters. She noticed how Graham kept his phone closer than before. She noticed the way his voice dropped into silence the moment she walked past the kitchen while he was speaking to someone out on the back patio. She noticed late delivery receipts, unknown numbers calling during dinner, the way he came home with a kind of exhaustion that did not look like work fatigue, but something heavier, something like the strain of maintaining too many versions of himself at once. Graham noticed the change in Claire, too, but he misunderstood her silence. In his mind, his wife was simply moving through one of those vague emotional phases, something soft and feminine that time and a few kind gestures would smooth over. It never crossed his mind that she was listening to every faint click inside the structure of his life. He had grown too accustomed to seeing Claire as background, something that existed without needing to be seen, without asking questions, without stepping into the rooms he believed belonged only to him. Then the opportunity came, on a Thursday afternoon, so ordinary it almost felt cruel. Noah needed his vaccination records for a late summer camp application. Claire remembered saving a copy long ago, but after searching the kitchen drawers and the laundry room, she could not find it. She texted Graham, asking if he had brought it upstairs to his office. He replied almost instantly, unusually fast. "It might be in the left drawer of the file cabinet next to my desk. Just go grab it." Only when she stood in front of the office door did Claire realize something was off. The door was unlocked. In 10 years of marriage, she could count on one hand the number of times that door had been opened for her. Today, Graham had rushed out to meet someone in Savannah, or at least that was what he said. He had rushed enough to forget the key. Claire pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room carried the scent of dark wood, old paper, and the cologne Graham wore when he wanted to leave an impression. Afternoon light slipped through the blinds, cutting the space into long strips of shadow and gold. On the desk sat a closed laptop, a stack of sample menus, several folders of supplier contracts, and behind them, a charcoal-colored metal filing cabinet. The room was not messy. Graham was not that kind of man. Everything was arranged just neatly enough to create the illusion of control. But Claire saw something else immediately. There were too many recent documents left half-handled, as if someone had been pulling them out again and again, then shoving them back in a hurry. She found Noah's vaccination records almost instantly, exactly where Graham had said. She could have closed the drawer, walked out, finished the camp application, and let her unease hover unresolved for a few more months. But as she pulled the papers free, her fingertips brushed against something else, tucked deeper inside. Not a file. The edge of a dark gray fireproof bag, the kind people buy to store important documents when they fear fire, theft, or the possibility that everything might collapse faster than expected. Claire froze. The instinct of someone who had spent years living within invisible boundaries pulled her half a step back. No. Do not touch what he has hidden. Do not turn a suspicion into something you cannot undo. Then she thought of Noah sitting on the front step with his red baseball. She thought of the drawing where his father was nothing more than a shadow near the edge of the page. She thought of that small question in the night. Does Daddy like watching me play? Claire pulled the bag out. The zipper opened almost silently. That silence made her heart pound harder. Inside was a thick stack of documents, sorted into sections with colored clips. One glance at the organization told her everything. Whoever put them here did not want anyone else to see them, but needed to be able to find them quickly in a moment of panic. The first page was a notice of late payroll tax payments from one of the Whitmore hospitality locations. The second was an overdue balance notice from a wine distributor, the amount larger than Claire had ever imagined. The third was a business cash advance agreement, the kind of short-term loan known for carving deeply into future revenue with high fees and interest. The more she turned the pages, the slower her breathing became, the instinct of someone trained in finance stepping into danger. Panic does not help you read numbers correctly. She had known that for years. Claire sat down in Graham's chair. For so long, he had been the only one who sat there, back to the window, facing the room like a small king of paper and secrets. Now Claire took that place, turning page after page, and the first thing she felt was not shock. It was disbelief at the level of risk he had taken. The seafood restaurant owed suppliers. The wine bar was struggling with cash flow. The wedding venue had been leveraged through a bridge loan. A corporate credit line was nearing its limit. There were letters from a landlord, no longer polite like a partner, but edged with warning. Then she reached the file that made the entire room tilt. A loan restructuring document with her name listed as a secondary guarantor. Claire stared at the line for a long time. Her name was there, clear, complete, cold, as if it had always belonged. Below it was an electronic signature. Not the one she used at the bank. Not quite the same as the signatures on lease agreements or school forms for Noah. It was similar enough to pass a careless glance, but Claire had reviewed hundreds of forms and appendices. The falseness revealed itself in the break of the stroke. This was not just debt. Graham had pulled her into it. She kept reading. An additional mortgage tied to the townhouse. Another personal guarantee dated on a day she clearly remembered being at Noah's parent-teacher meeting. A chain of printed emails between Graham and someone named Randall Pierce, including a line about needing to clean up the personal ownership structure before the next funding round. That phrase sent a chill through her. Not because she did not understand it, because she understood it too well. Graham was not just sinking. He was trying to move into another phase of borrowing by stacking the future of his family on top of a foundation that was already rotting. From downstairs came the faint sound of the ice maker dropping cubes into a tray. It was a small sound, but in that moment it echoed like a countdown. Claire sat motionless, the papers spread before her like the aftermath of an accident without blood, yet capable of destroying an entire life. The fear came last. Not fear of infidelity, not fear of being lied to, but the very real fear that if everything collapsed, she and Noah would be standing directly beneath the falling roof. That everything Graham said about a secure future was nothing more than paper pasted over damp walls. That every evening she tried to keep calm, every time she chose not to ask further, every silent agreement had given him more time to dig this hole deeper. Claire did not know how long she sat there. The sunlight had shifted. The lines across the wooden floor moved slowly like the hand of a clock. When she finally stood, she was no longer the woman who had entered that room looking for vaccination records. She took out her phone. Her hands did not shake. One by one, she photographed everything. Straight angles, clear light, the first pages, the account numbers, the dates, the signatures, the bank names, the creditors, the senders. She captured the emails from Randall Pierce, the overdue notices, every page that carried her name. When she was done, she placed everything back exactly where it had been. Edges aligned, clips in place. The fireproof bag returned to the drawer as if no one had ever touched it. Noah's vaccination record placed on top, a quiet, bitter reminder of what had brought her here. Before leaving, Claire turned back for one last look at Graham's chair. Now she understood why he kept this room locked. Not to work, but to keep reality from leaking out. That night, after Noah had fallen asleep, Claire sat alone at the dining table with her old laptop and transferred every photo into a new folder. She named it simply, without emotion, as if the less dramatic it sounded, the more real it became. If I ever need to leave. She stared at those words glowing on the screen in the dark kitchen for a long time. Outside, the sound of Graham's car turning into the driveway. Claire closed the laptop before he stepped inside. From that night on, she was no longer the woman afraid of finding out too late. She became the woman who started preparing before everything exploded. The next morning, everything unfolded with a kind of normalcy that felt almost insulting. Noah spilled milk across the breakfast table. The toaster clicked with a dry, hollow sound. Graham fastened his cufflinks while scrolling through messages on his phone, his voice even as he asked Claire whether she had found the summer camp records. Claire stood by the sink, her hand resting on a white ceramic mug, and said she had. That was all. Not another word. Not a glance held too long. Not a single sign that the night before she had sat in his office, had touched numbers capable of crushing this entire family within a few quarters. Graham looked at her, and saw exactly what he wanted to see. A woman worn down after months of disappointment in her husband, but still gentle enough not to make a scene. In his mind, Claire's silence meant everything was still under control. He did not understand that some silences are no longer endurance. They are preparation for leaving. Claire waited until Noah was at school before calling Jenna Brooks. Jenna had been her college friend, the one who stayed up all night with her in the library, sharing cold coffee and soft, stale fries from vending machines. While Claire chose hotel revenue analysis, Jenna had gone into banking risk control. They did not see each other as often anymore, but some friendships do not need constant contact to remain intact at their core. Jenna was one of those. Her voice on the other end of the line was still quick, precise, and clear, just like it used to be. When Claire said she needed help reviewing some personal credit matters and guarantee obligations, Jenna paused for exactly 2 beats. No intrusive curiosity, no rapid-fire questions, just an instruction to come to her office that afternoon. Bring identification, and if there were any documents, bring everything. Claire arrived at the bank in a simple dress, her hair tied low, carrying a canvas tote like a mother stopping by to handle a routine errand. No one looking at her would have guessed she was stepping into one of the most important afternoons of her life. Jenna closed the door to a small office behind the main workspace, waited for Claire to sit, then asked softly how much of the truth she wanted to know. Claire answered immediately. All of it. For more than an hour, the glow of the computer screen reflected across both their faces in cold fragments of light. Jenna entered information, cross-checked records, opened each credit line, each borrowing trace, each legal tie connected to Claire's name. The small room was so quiet that the sound of typing resembled the ticking of a clock. Then Jenna leaned back, fingers interlocked in front of her chest. There are 3 things you need to know right now, she said. And for the first time that afternoon, her voice was no longer neutral. 1. Graham owes more than what a healthy business can sustain. 2. Part of that debt has already begun attaching itself to personal assets. 3. Your name is showing up in places it should never appear. Claire thought she had prepared herself, but hearing someone else say it aloud, complete and undeniable, still made her stomach tighten. Jenna printed several copies and placed them in front of Claire like medical test results. There was a credit line tied to the townhouse, a secondary guarantee for a loan restructuring tied to the wedding venue, at least 2 electronic signatures filed under Claire's name on dates and times she knew with certainty she had not signed anything. Jenna pointed to one section, then looked up, her gaze sharp and exposed. This is not just poor financial management. This is brushing up against fraud. Claire looked down at the papers, seeing her name stitched into them like rough thread pulled through torn fabric. A cold sensation spread slowly from the back of her neck down her spine. It was no longer abstract. Now it had shape. It had stamps. It had case numbers. It had a clear path of legal consequence. Do you want to report this right away? Jenna asked. If you go that route, you may be able to separate yourself from part of the risk. Claire did not answer immediately. In her mind appeared Noah's face, bent over a book at school, the locked office door, the way Graham spoke about the future as if it was something he had the right to distribute. Not yet, Claire said finally. I need to understand the entire picture first. Jenna studied her for a long moment. There was concern in her eyes, hesitation, and something else, a new kind of respect. Not many people can make cold decisions while their lives are cracking open. Jenna understood her friend was no longer standing at the edge of a cliff just to cry. Claire was measuring its depth. That afternoon, Jenna helped her open a savings account at a different bank. It was not linked to anything Graham used. No paper statements would be sent home. It would not appear on any financial portals he could access. Claire deposited her first amount, very small. Money from an old freelance project Graham had never paid attention to. It was not enough to create freedom, but it was the beginning of choice. And sometimes, those two things are not the same. From that day forward, Claire's life split into two layers. The outer layer remained the same: a quiet wife, a punctual mother, a polite daughter-in-law, a woman who knew how to smile through candlelit dinners and crystal glasses. She still drove Noah to school, scheduled dental appointments, remembered to buy toilet paper, dog food, fever medicine, birthday gifts for his classmates. She still sat across from Graham at the dinner table, listening as he talked about investors, food critics, rising ingredient costs, changing kitchen staff. But the layer beneath was entirely different. Claire created an encrypted folder on her old laptop. She backed up the photographed documents into a new cloud storage account. Every suspicious email, every unfamiliar receipt, every evasive answer from Graham, every broken promise he made to Noah, she recorded. Not emotionally, by date, by logic. The way someone builds a case file so that one day no one can claim she is imagining things. She took on more work from Lydia Monroe, starting with just a few hours each week reviewing revenue reports for an aging boutique hotel on Kiowa Island. Then another project for a small resort struggling with beverage cost losses. Lydia did not ask too many questions. She simply said that if Claire wanted to return to the profession step by step, there would always be room for someone who could see what others overlooked. Each month, Claire moved small amounts into her new account. 100 here, 200 there. A refund from insurance. The leftover from grocery money if she managed to save that week. She did not try to move quickly. Quick is visible. She moved like rain soaking into soil, little by little, steady, persistent. Noah also became part of that preparation, without knowing it. Claire took him to see a young speech specialist with a warm voice and patient eyes. In the early sessions, Noah was shy, speaking softly, stumbling at the beginning of words when talking about his father. Claire sat in the hallway, hearing his voice drift in and out through the slightly open door, her chest tightening with a quiet, steady pain. But slowly, Noah began to relax. He learned to breathe before speaking, learned that it was not his fault when adults broke their promises. Some days after the sessions, he would run to the car and tell her in one long stream about a plastic lizard in the therapist's toy box without stumbling once. Claire would smile and turn her face toward the window so he would not see her eyes turning red. Graham barely noticed these changes. If he knew Noah was seeing a school specialist, he only nodded and said it was fine, as long as no one exaggerated things. In his mind, any problem that did not directly affect his schedule or reputation was secondary. And that was his greatest mistake. He did not understand that Claire had once been the best in her department at detecting small discrepancies before they became crises. He had shelved that skill, along with the years she stayed home, assuming it would gather dust and fade away. In reality, it had only been sleeping. Now it was awake, sharper, colder, honed by motherhood and the fear of losing a way out. Some nights Graham came home late, carrying the scent of wine, oak, and a trace of unfamiliar perfume along his collar. Claire had no proof yet of anything beyond financial deception. She had not named Sabrina. She did not yet know the woman's face, but her instincts began collecting another kind of data. Gaps. Interrupted sentences, phones turned face down, evenings labeled as meetings with brand partners that stretched longer than they should. One night, while Graham slept beside her, Claire lay awake staring at the ceiling in the dark. The house was so quiet she could hear the refrigerator motor hum faintly downstairs. She thought about the small savings account, the hidden archive, Noah sleeping peacefully in the next room, one arm outside the blanket, and the truth that if she did nothing, One day both she and her son could be pushed out of this life beneath debts she had never created. Claire turned her head, looking at the back of Graham's neck in the darkness. He still believed he was sleeping beside a woman too soft to leave. Claire closed her eyes. She was no longer soft. She was simply quiet. That silence changed everything, even if no one on the outside could see it. It did not make Claire weaker the way Graham had always assumed. If anything, it sharpened her senses, as if years of being overlooked had honed her into something thin, precise, and unbreakable. She began to notice the things she had once chosen to ignore, just to keep this house feeling like a family. At first, it was only a scent, not the cloying sweetness young women left behind as they passed through hotel lobbies, something sugary and obvious that lingered in the air. This was more refined, more expensive, layered with white florals and dry wood, clinging faintly to the collar of Graham's shirt on the nights he came home late. Too subtle to accuse, too consistent to be coincidence. Claire noticed it for the first time when she bent down to pick up the tie he had tossed onto the chair. She paused for a second, the strip of black fabric sliding through her fingers like something cold and alive. Then she folded it neatly, hung it up, and said nothing. Graham noticed that his wife asked fewer questions and took it as progress. He had always believed that any crisis could be managed as long as the woman in the house knew when to stay quiet. In his mind, Claire was tired now, resigned, finally understanding that his work always came before small, inconvenient emotions. That confidence made him careless. He started texting at the dinner table, started smiling at his screen, then flipping his phone face down when Noah looked up. Started changing his shirt before coming downstairs, as if a stranger's scent could be buried beneath aftershave and a half-hearted apology. Claire did not confront him. She kept track. One Friday evening, while Graham was pouring wine for a few business partners who had come over for dinner, his phone lit up on the kitchen counter. The screen flashed a single line before going dark. "Don't forget the navy pocket square. I like you in that color." No name, no heart emoji. Nothing more was needed. People who believe they are safe are usually only careful on the surface. Claire's eyes passed over the message as she set down a tray of cheese. Her hands stayed steady. No one but her knew her heart had just tightened, then released again in a rhythm that felt painfully familiar. Not jealousy. Jealousy belongs to marriages that can still be saved. What Claire felt in that moment was confirmation. The last empty space in the picture had been filled. Now she knew, more clearly than ever, what the man she lived with was running from, and who he was running toward. The woman entered her life before she had a name. Then she had one. Sabrina Vale. The name began appearing in Graham's conversations more often than necessary. At first, she was just a brand stylist helping refresh the image of the wine bar, then a highly connected event consultant, then a woman who understood what high-end clients really wanted. Graham spoke about Sabrina too much, in the exact way men tend to when they believe they are being discreet. He tried to say her name in a neutral tone, but every time something in his face lit up just slightly. The same flicker Claire used to think was reserved for new business ideas. One evening, while Claire was folding Noah's school uniform in the laundry room, Graham stood in the doorway, adjusting his cufflinks, his voice casual, as if they were discussing the weather. "You should put a bit more effort into your appearance when you go out with me, Claire." She looked up. Graham shrugged, as if the comment were harmless. "I'm just being honest. Some women understand the value of investing in how they present themselves. Sabrina, for example. She's always polished, professional. People can see her energy the moment she walks in." Claire looked at her husband under the harsh white light of the laundry room, tiny particles of dust floating between them like fine ash. She understood exactly what he was doing. Not just having an affair. Graham was using that other woman as a mirror to chip away at his wife's self-worth. It was a kind of cruelty that never needed to raise its voice. No shouting, no insults, just comparison, steady and cold, until the person on the receiving end began to question what they were lacking. But Graham had miscalculated one thing. Claire was no longer in the stage of searching for flaws within herself. She simply said that Noah needed to finish his reading before bed and walked past him. The calmness of her response made Graham pause. He had expected more, a hint of hurt, a flicker of jealousy. Something that proved he still had the power to stir her emotions. Instead, Claire moved on, as if he had just commented on a brand of towels. That was when the irritation began. With Sabrina, he was the misunderstood man, drained by a dull marriage, someone who deserved more light than the obligation-heavy house he returned to each night. With Claire, he still wanted to remain at the center, at least enough to feel he had not lost control. When Claire stopped reacting, Graham felt insulted. He began talking more about how success required sacrifice, started coming home later, like a quiet form of provocation, began to disappear, even when his body was still sitting across from her. Claire noticed everything. She also noticed Noah. Children hear more than adults think. One day after school, Noah came home quieter than usual. While Claire was slicing apples, he suddenly asked why someone on his friend Miles's phone had said his dad was seen with a very pretty woman at an outdoor party. The question landed in the kitchen like a glass that had fallen but had not yet shattered. Claire turned, seeing the confusion in Noah's eyes, the kind that comes from hearing something instinctively wrong. Claire took a slow breath. She did not ask who had said it. She refused to feed the unconscious cruelty children often copy from adults. She simply said that sometimes adults have work relationships that can look different from the outside, then slid the plate of apples closer to him. Noah did not fully believe her, but he nodded. That small nod twisted something deep inside Claire. A child should not have to learn how to accept vague answers so early. A few days later, in a way that felt both accidental and inevitable, Claire met Sabrina for the first time. It was the annual Charleston Architectural Preservation fundraiser, hosted at Patricia Whitmore's home. The house always made Claire feel like she was stepping into a museum, where everything cost more than necessary and every smile had been practiced in front of a mirror. Scented candles burned on silver stands. Crystal glasses chimed with delicate precision. Older men talked about land and investments, while their wives spoke about private schools, yachts, and European vacations, with the ease of people who had never needed to check a bank balance before swiping a card. Claire came with Noah because Patricia had said this gathering would be more intimate, a few familiar families, and it would be good for the child to make a brief appearance before going upstairs with the nanny. Claire knew it was not an invitation. It was a test of appearances. She came anyway, wearing a fitted, deep blue dress, understated, holding Noah's hand as they stepped into the camellia-scented foyer. Graham had not arrived yet. Patricia greeted Claire with a smile as thin as a newly sharpened blade. She complimented the dress in a clipped tone, then turned away before finishing the sentence. Noah tightened his grip on his mother's hand. Claire felt his body tense. He was always sensitive in rooms where adults spoke politely, but their eyes did not match. 15 minutes later, the front door opened. Graham walked in first, flawless as always, the pocket square exactly navy. Beside him was Sabrina Vale. She was young, beautiful in a way that had been carefully constructed down to every detail. Honey blonde hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. A cream dress that traced her slender frame, not revealing, just refined enough that no one could openly call it inappropriate. In her hand was an ivory clutch, her nails smooth and glossy, like porcelain. Sabrina smiled as she entered, a smile practiced to make an entire room immediately think of freshness. Graham placed his hand on the small of her back. Just for a moment. But to Claire it flashed like lightning. The room paused, just slightly, then adjusted itself. That was how this world handled scandal. No one pointed at it. No one named it. They simply widened the space enough for the humiliation to pass through while keeping the tablecloth clean. Graham spoke lightly. "Everyone, this is Sabrina. She's consulting on branding and event strategy for the restaurant group." Patricia moved toward them almost immediately. Her eyes swept over Sabrina, pausing at her skin, her dress, her hair, then lighting up with a satisfaction that made Claire feel sick. She took Sabrina's hand, praised her youth, her elegance, her presence. No one asked why Graham had arrived with another woman, while his wife stood right there holding their son's hand. Claire said nothing. Noah looked up at her, then at Graham, then at Sabrina. The confusion on his face was so clear Claire wanted to take him out of that house immediately. But she stayed. Not out of weakness, because she knew that if she reacted now, the story would be rewritten instantly. Claire was jealous. Claire ruined the evening. Claire did not know how to behave. She would not give them that. Sabrina turned to her with a carefully measured, modest smile. "I've been meaning to meet you." Her voice was soft, warm, almost sincere. And in that moment, Claire understood something else. Sabrina was not entirely the architect of this situation. She was in love with a version of Graham he had carefully constructed. She had walked into this believing she was the future, not knowing she was stepping onto a stage that was already collapsing beneath her. That made the scene even more tragic. Patricia turned back to Claire, as if suddenly remembering she was still there. "Claire, could you check on the appetizers in the kitchen?" She said it as if Claire had been born to carry trays. Noah squeezed his mother's hand, just slightly. That tiny gesture shifted something inside Claire from pain to cold clarity. Not the cold of despair, the cold that comes when the truth can no longer be disguised. She bent down, smoothed Noah's hair, told him to go upstairs to the nanny for a while. Then she straightened and looked directly at Graham for the first time that evening. He expected to see hurt, shame, a wife being replaced in front of her own family, shattering like thin glass. What he received instead was a calm so unsettling it felt almost dangerous. And in that moment, for the first time in months, Graham realized he could no longer read Claire. That was the moment the balance began to shift, completely and irreversibly, toward a direction he could not yet see. After the night at Patricia's house, Graham did not change in the way cheap villains in bad stories often do. He did not come home and confess. He did not apologize. He did not explode in anger after being exposed. Graham Whitmore did something far more dangerous. He behaved as if everything that had happened that night was reasonable, civilized, even explainable, if only Claire were mature enough to look at it properly. That had always been Graham's greatest talent, turning cruelty into something that sounded reasonable. The next morning he came downstairs in a crisp white shirt, still holding the sharp lines from the iron, poured himself coffee as usual, kissed Noah on the head, then asked Claire if she could move their son's dentist appointment to next week because he had an important meeting with investors. He did not mention Sabrina. He did not mention the fact that this small city had likely already begun whispering about the woman who had walked beside him the night before. In Graham's mind, silence was a tool. If he did not name the situation, it would shrink. If Claire did not react the way she was supposed to, it meant she was still within his control. But Claire was no longer the woman from the early years of their marriage, the one who questioned herself first before ever daring to doubt her husband. She watched Graham lift his coffee, watched that calm, almost brazen composure, and for the first time felt that there was no longer any pain in her that needed his comfort. Only a clarity, sharp and cold like glass. Noah made that morning harder to breathe through than anything else. He sat at the table, his feet swinging above the floor, carefully spreading jam on his toast the way children do when they are trying to act as if everything is normal. But Claire saw the way he glanced at his father just a little longer, then dropped his eyes just a little faster. Children do not fully understand affairs, betrayal, or a marriage that is quietly rotting. They understand the invisible shifts in a room. They understand when the way adults look at each other changes. They understand when something is no longer where it is supposed to be. Graham left at 8:20, leaving behind the scent of aftershave and a kitchen that felt both larger and colder. Claire cleared Noah's plate, wiped a streak of jam from the edge of the table, then stood still for a long time, watching sunlight slide across the stone countertop. In the reflection of the glass door, she saw her own face, paler than before, but harder. That was when her phone vibrated. A message from Graham. "We need to talk tonight." Claire stared at the words. Not I, we. She almost laughed. Men like Graham only used that word when they were about to make a decision for someone else, then wrap it in the illusion of mutual agreement. The entire day stretched out slow and tense, like a string pulled too tight. Claire took Noah to school, stopped by the pharmacy, replied to freelance emails for Lydia, then sat in her car in the parking lot behind the supermarket for nearly 20 minutes without starting the engine. She was not afraid of the conversation that night. What weighed on her chest was the certainty that Graham had already decided something about her life, without ever considering whether he needed her permission. And he had. That night, after Noah went upstairs with his pirate book and his moon-shaped nightlight, Graham poured himself a glass of bourbon and stood by the small bar in the living room like a man preparing to present quarterly results to a board. Claire did not sit down immediately. She stood by the window, arms crossed, looking out into the dark backyard where the old oak tree cast a long shadow like spilled ink. Graham began with a line he had clearly rehearsed. "I think we both know this can't be saved anymore." Can't be saved anymore. The way he said it made their 10-year marriage sound like a depreciated asset that had just been reassessed. No mention of the other woman. No mention of the promises he had broken in front of his son. No mention of the financial secrets hidden in his office upstairs. Just one clean, neutral sentence. Enough so that later, when retelling the story, he could say he had been calm and rational. Claire did not respond. It was her silence that forced Graham to continue. "I want a divorce." The words hovered between them like a blade catching the light, but Claire had known they were coming. Somewhere deeper than the pain, she even felt something lift slightly inside her. At last, the monster had stepped into the light, instead of crawling beneath the floor. She turned and looked directly at her husband. "And what are you proposing?" Graham exhaled, as if this was finally his area of expertise. The negotiation, the structuring of damage in a way that preserved his image. "I want to keep the house, the Range Rover, full control of Whitmore Hospitality Group and all related assets, the wine bar, the wedding venue, the investment accounts tied to the company, the wine collection, the art, the custom furniture." He spoke smoothly, clearly, barely glancing at the notes laid out on the counter. It was obvious he had been planning this for a long time, perhaps longer than he had been pretending to save the marriage. Claire listened to each asset as he listed it, and behind every word she saw an entire system of debt obligations, mortgages, guarantees, legal risks that Graham still believed only he understood. In her mind, the numbers moved like shards of reflected glass. She immediately saw what lay beneath his greed. He needed everything under his name. Not just because of Sabrina, not just because of ego. Graham needed a clean surface to keep borrowing, to keep moving money, to continue a performance that had been cracking for a long time. "What about Noah?" Claire asked. Graham hesitated for the first time. It was not the hesitation of a father afraid of losing his child. It was the hesitation of a man who did not want to step into the inconvenient part of the negotiation. "He should stay with you," Graham said after a pause. "You've always been closer to him. My schedule isn't suitable for complicated custody arrangements. I don't want to drag Noah into an unnecessary custody battle." Unnecessary. Claire felt a coldness spread through her entire body. The way Graham spoke about Noah was not the way a man spoke about his 7-year-old son, a boy whose eyes still lit up at the sound of his father's car in the driveway. He spoke as if deciding which party should keep a piece of furniture, not rejecting his child in anger, but with calculated indifference. That was far more cruel. In Graham's mind, this was generosity. He even saw himself as decent. He would not fight for custody just to negotiate child support. He was letting Claire have what she cared about most, while he kept what truly held value. That was the logic of a man who had equated value with ownership for far too long. Claire looked at him and understood one final truth. Graham did not truly love anyone but his own reflection. Not Sabrina, not Noah, perhaps not even Claire, ever. He only loved the feeling of being reflected back as an important man. "So you want everything," she said. Graham took a sip of bourbon, his eyes darkening as he mistook her calm for surrender. "I want a clean solution. No dragging this out. No making things uglier than they need to be. If you cooperate, I'll make sure you and Noah are taken care of." Taken care of. Claire almost smiled at how smoothly the words came out. He had betrayed her, hidden debt, pulled her name into fraudulent guarantees, brought his mistress into his mother's house as if presenting a replacement, and now stood there talking about stability, like a risk manager addressing shareholders. But she did not smile. She simply asked who his lawyer was. "Victor Lang," Graham replied immediately, clearly pleased the conversation was moving in the direction he wanted. "He'll send over the paperwork. I'd advise you not to complicate this, Claire. Honestly, I built everything in this house. I created the business. You know that." "I know more than you think," Claire thought. But she did not say it. She simply gave a small nod. "Fine. Send the papers." That ease made Graham look at her more closely. This time he saw no pain, no anger, no tears. Just a woman standing very straight under the warm light, her face so still it almost felt unfamiliar. For a brief moment something flickered through him. Not quite fear. Not yet. Just the instinctive discomfort when a door that had always been open suddenly went still. But he dismissed it. Claire had no money, no network, no understanding of corporate structures, no standing among Charleston's legal circles. She would realize she had no better options. That was what Graham believed as he went upstairs that night. That was also what led him to make the biggest mistake of his life. A few days later, Claire walked into Victor Lang's office in downtown Charleston. A building of glass and gray stone, elevators scented with polished wood, a reception desk so quiet it made people feel their own voices were too loud. Claire wore an old cream blazer that fit her perfectly, her hair tied low, a slim folder in her hand. She came alone. Victor Lang was the kind of lawyer who saw everyone as a variable in a case file. Polite, measured, every word calculated. He slid a thick stack of documents across the table, his tone professional, explaining that his client wanted a civilized, efficient settlement that minimized damage for all parties, especially the child. Claire opened the file. Page after page, Graham kept everything. She would receive personal belongings, a short-term token support payment, custody of Noah, and almost nothing else. Victor said this was a reasonable arrangement based on actual contribution. Then Graham, sitting beside his lawyer, leaned back and said the sentence Claire would later remember with perfect clarity. "She doesn't need her own lawyer. Claire doesn't understand these things. She used to do hotel revenue analysis, not corporate transactions. In Graham's mind, it was simply a fact. In Victor's mind, it was a client who was too confident. In Claire's mind, the sentence landed like the final lock clicking into place on an old door. She looked up at Graham, then closed the folder neatly. "I'll review it and get back to you," she said. Graham blinked. He had expected bargaining, pride, at the very least a panicked question about money. But Claire stood, picked up her bag, thanked Victor in a completely normal tone, and walked out of the office, as if she were the one who had just seen the entire board clearly. Outside, the wind from the harbor moved between the buildings, carrying a faint trace of salt. Claire stood on the sidewalk, gripping the strap of her bag until it hurt. Not from humiliation. That part had died long ago. But because she could finally see the path ahead with perfect clarity. She did not need to keep half of the wreckage. She needed a complete exit. And to get it, she would have to find someone skilled enough to turn Graham's own greed into the rope that would tighten around his neck. Jenna gave Claire that name on a gray, low-hanging afternoon, the kind of day where the sky pressed down on the city, while the two of them sat in a small cafe tucked into a street most tourists never found. Outside the window, Charleston blurred behind long trails of rain. Inside, the espresso machine hissed in sharp bursts, the scent of dark roasted beans wrapping around the room like a kind of artificial warmth Claire no longer had the strength to believe in. "Monica Hale," Jenna said, lowering her voice as if she were offering an escape rather than just a name. "She's not the kind of lawyer who performs in court. She wins because she reads more carefully than everyone else." Claire repeated the name silently. Monica Hale. Short. Sharp. Not soft. It sounded like someone who would not be easily unsettled by men accustomed to giving orders. Monica's office was on the second floor of a renovated brick house in a quieter part of downtown. No glass walls, no expansive lobby, no expensive abstract paintings meant to intimidate anyone who walked in. Just dark wooden stairs, soft echoes of footsteps, and tall windows that let natural light flood the space as if there was nothing here that needed to prove itself. Claire had grown used to Graham's kind of power, and Victor Lang's, the kind that wrapped itself in polished surfaces. This place was different. It made you feel unthreatened, yet at the same time, incapable of lying. Monica Hale was in her early 50s, brown hair threaded with gray, cut neatly, her face sharp without needing elaborate makeup, as if shaped by will alone. When Claire stepped in, Monica stood and offered her hand, the grip firm enough to immediately signal that this was not a woman who let important things slide. "Sit," Monica said. "Then tell me everything from the beginning. In order. I don't need the tragedy first. I need the structure." The sentence loosened something inside Claire's chest. Finally, someone who did not require her to perform as a perfectly broken victim before offering help. She began to speak. About Graham. About Whitmore Hospitality Group. About the years she had been pushed out of financial matters with words that sounded like care. About Noah sitting by the window with a red ball. About the fireproof bag. About the guarantees signed in her name. About Sabrina walking into Patricia's house like an unspoken declaration. About the meeting with Victor Lang and the way Graham had sat there, so certain, so effortlessly dismissive, telling her she was not equipped to understand the assets of her own marriage. Monica did not interrupt. She listened the way someone listens to a scene report, occasionally jotting a few words onto a yellow legal pad. When Claire finished, the office fell into a brief silence. Rain tapped softly against the window. The wall clock ticked, barely audible. In that silence, Claire realized she had been holding her breath. Monica opened the binder Claire had brought, each section marked with colored tabs. Vendor debt, tax obligations, credit lines, secondary mortgages, personal guarantees, emails with Randall Pierce, forged signatures, short notes about Noah, broken promises, details Claire had gathered over 3 years with a persistence no one in the Whitmore family had ever believed she possessed. Monica turned each page at a measured pace, not rushed, not overly impressed. But as she moved further in, her lips pressed tighter, in a different way. Not pity. Focus. The focus of someone who had just realized that behind her client's quiet exterior was solid steel. Finally, Monica looked up. "Most people come to me when the house is already on fire," she said. "You came when you first smelled the smoke." Claire did not respond. In that moment, Monica's respect carried more weight than any comfort she had received in years. "Can I claim half?" Claire asked. "South Carolina follows equitable distribution. I can ask for my share, right?" Monica leaned back in her chair. She looked at Claire the way a doctor looks at a patient before telling the truth about a serious condition. "You can. If we take the traditional route, you have grounds to request division of marital assets. You have evidence your name was used in financial obligations. You can attack the fraud. You can force independent valuation. You can push for full disclosure. We can absolutely go that direction." She paused, then continued. "But the question is, half of what?" Claire understood before Monica finished the thought. Still, Monica said it, slow and precise. "Half of a sinking ship is still standing on a sinking ship." The sentence cut straight through Claire, cold but exact. It was exactly what she had felt since leaving Victor Lang's office, just not yet put into words. She did not want to win the way people usually imagined in a divorce. She did not want half a house surrounded by debt. She did not want half a company already rotting from its foundation. She did not want to spend years paying for something she had never built. "I don't want half," Claire said. "I want to be clean of him." Monica studied her for a long moment. Then, for the first time, she smiled, just slightly, like a blade catching light. "Good. Then we're speaking the same language." She pulled a different notebook closer, open to a blank page. "If Graham insists on taking all tangible assets and business interests, we let him. But no asset exists in isolation. Every asset carries obligations. Debt, taxes, mortgages, guarantees, potential disputes, operating costs, payables. If he wants to be king of this, then he also wears its crown of thorns." Claire felt her heart beat faster, not from excitement, but from the sensation of one machine in her mind beginning to align with another, sharper one. Monica continued, her voice low and steady. "We draft an agreement that gives him exactly what he believes he wants: the house, the car, control of the company, equity, licenses, all derived benefits, everything. But we attach clear language, impossible to misinterpret, that the party receiving those assets also assumes all financial obligations, present and future, directly or indirectly tied to them." Claire sat very still. Outside, the rain had softened into fine streaks of light on the glass. "He won't read it carefully," she said quietly. Monica did not answer immediately. She had met enough successful men to recognize a certain blindness that only appeared when pride was convinced it was winning. "Someone else might read it," she said. "Victor Lang is not a fool. But Graham might be arrogant enough not to listen to his own lawyer," Claire added. This time, Monica nodded. "That's where the trap becomes legal. Not because we hide anything, but because we say everything, lay it all out, and let him choose not to see." Monica called in an associate, a forensic review specialist named Elias Trent, who worked on contract. He would later go through the disclosure chain to ensure nothing was missing that Graham's side could use to claim deception. Claire listened as they discussed debt structures, appendices, the exact language required to leave no gaps. There was no cinematic drama in that conversation, only precision. But to Claire, that precision was the kind of power she could trust. "There are no dirty tricks here," Monica said after Elias left. "I won't help you play that game. What saves you won't be manipulation. It will be transparency so complete that he can blame no one but his own ego." Claire nodded. Then another thought surfaced, softer but sharper. What if he reads everything? Monica placed both hands on the desk. "Then we pivot. We go after the forged signatures. We open a forensic audit. We bring everything into the light and let the court see the hollow structure. You won't be worse off than you are now." But I don't think Graham will read it. Men like him only read what confirms what they already believe. By late afternoon, the first outline of the strategy took shape across the table between them. Claire looked at the legal language, the numbered clauses, the phrases so dry they almost felt cruel. Yet in that dryness, there was a strange kind of fairness. No shouting, no arguing, no pleading. Just structure, finally aligned with truth. When Monica turned to the page that would contain the liability clause, she placed her finger on it. "This page," she said. "This is where a greedy man signs himself into his own gravity." Claire looked down at the blank sheet. In her mind, she saw Noah asleep in his room under the moon-shaped nightlight. She saw Graham's chair in the upstairs office. She saw the outline of a father standing like a shadow at the edge of a page. "I don't want revenge," Claire said, almost confessing to herself. Monica looked at her, her expression softening for the first time. "I know. That's why you'll win. People who want revenge go too far. People who want freedom know exactly where to stop." When Claire left the office, the rain had completely stopped. The city smelled of wet earth, fresh leaves, and salt drifting in from the harbor. She stood on the steps for a moment, breathing in until her chest ached slightly. Not because everything was resolved, but because for the first time in a long while, the road ahead was no longer something she had to feel her way through in the dark. It had shape, direction, a name. That night, after Noah fell asleep, Claire sat at the dining table in the Whitmore house, opened her old laptop, and created a new folder inside "If I Ever Need to Leave." She named it Freedom. Then she waited for Monica to send the first draft, while upstairs Graham slept soundly, like a man who had no idea which page was quietly waiting for him just ahead. The draft arrived the next morning, clean, cold, and precise, like a blade already sharpened. Claire opened the attachment while Noah was still eating cereal before school. Lines of legal language filled the screen, stripped of emotion, yet her heartbeat still quickened. The house, the car, control of the group, equity, licenses, associated accounts, the liability clause, waivers of independent review. Everything in place, clear, no gaps. Claire sat there for a long time staring at the document. Part of her was still struck by the brutal simplicity of the plan. No need for deception. No need to twist the truth. Just give Graham exactly what he believed he deserved. Then let the true weight of it pull him under. From that day on, pressure began tightening from every direction. The first call came from Sabrina. It came mid-afternoon while Claire sat in her car in the parking lot outside a stationery store after buying extra notebooks for Noah. The name lit up on her screen like a bright streak of lipstick on white fabric. Claire looked at it for a moment before answering. Sabrina's voice was sweeter than usual, the kind of sweetness that comes from someone who believes they are in a position of advantage and can afford to sound kind. She said she knew this situation was difficult, said that as women they should understand each other, said that she and Graham were trying to reorganize their lives, and everything would be much easier if Claire expedited the process. Toward the end, Sabrina slipped more than she should have. She mentioned a dinner with investors, mentioned needing clean asset documentation to finalize a funding package, mentioned that they were looking at new properties near the harbor. Claire listened, her eyes fixed on the line of parked cars glowing under the sun beyond the windshield. Each sentence Sabrina spoke felt like another drawer being pulled open, one Graham had tried to keep shut. He was not just seeking a divorce to step into a new life. He needed the divorce papers as a financial instrument. A fresh coat of paint over a rotting wall so he could continue selling the illusion. Claire responded so little that it made Sabrina hesitate on the other end. She simply said she would consider it, then ended the call. But as she set her phone down, she knew one thing with certainty. Graham was desperate for capital. A man desperate for capital and convinced he is about to win is a dangerous man. Also the most likely to make mistakes. That night, Graham sent an email. No call, no direct conversation. Just a short, sharp, cold email. The kind written by someone who believes ink on paper makes a threat sound civilized. He said his patience was wearing thin, that if Claire continued delaying, Victor Lang was prepared to ask the court to recognize malicious stalling, that things would become unnecessarily ugly, that she should think about Noah. Claire read the email 3 times, not out of fear, but to memorize its rhythm. Monica had been right. Graham did not realize that every time he pushed, every time he left a trace of urgency, he was building a case against himself. A calm and indifferent man does not rush a signature like that. Only someone with fire behind him grows impatient enough to let the smoke show. Monica almost smiled when Claire forwarded the email. "Let him apply pressure," Monica said. "The more he pushes, the more he reveals his motive. You continue as if you're tired and just want this to end. Don't resist too early." Claire understood the role she had to play. She had been underestimated for so long that acting like a woman worn down by pressure required almost no effort. She only needed to soften her gaze, slow her speech, and nod in places where she once would have questioned. Patricia Whitmore stepped in at just the right moment, as if she could smell opportunity in the air. She organized a family brunch that Sunday at her house, inviting a few close relatives, a familiar pastor, and, of course, Graham. The invitation sent to Claire was wrapped in language about civility, graceful closure, and what was best for Noah. It was clear this was not an invitation. It was a hearing, one where they would place her in the center of the room and force her into a version of reason that justified Graham's decision. Claire still went. She wore a pale gray dress, no jewelry except small earrings. Noah came with her, holding her hand as they walked through the large foyer, scented with lemon polish and butter from pastries in the kitchen. Patricia greeted them with a warmth so practiced it had become instinct. Graham stood by the window in a light shirt, smiling and chatting with his uncle, like a man negotiating real estate, not dismantling a marriage. The meal began with conversations about weather, schools, yachts, charity work. Then it gradually shifted to its real purpose. Patricia set down her teacup and looked at Claire with the soft authority of someone who always believed she was dispensing wisdom. "Claire," she said, "I think you're mature enough to understand that dragging this out will only make things harder for Noah." The pastor nodded slightly, as if a truth had just been spoken. Graham did not speak immediately. He let his mother lead, as he often did when he wanted to create the impression of collective agreement. Only when all eyes turned did he speak, measured, tired, almost generous. "I just want a clean resolution. You know I'll always make sure you and Noah are taken care of, but we can't keep everything hanging like this." Claire saw Noah sitting at the corner of the table, with a glass of orange juice, unusually quiet. He did not understand every word, but he understood when voices began to press someone into a corner. His small hand tightened around the napkin beneath the table. That detail alone was enough for Claire to know she could not let anger rise, not even for a second. She lowered her gaze, let her shoulders soften just enough, and spoke in a quiet, tired voice. "I just want to make sure I understand everything before I sign." Patricia seized it immediately. "Understanding only goes so far, dear. Some financial and legal matters are not things everyone is trained to grasp. Sometimes the wisest choice is to trust those more capable." A few people around the table nodded, as if the insult had been nothing more than a civilized truth. Claire felt a coldness run down her spine, but outwardly she only tightened her grip on her teacup and nodded slightly. "Maybe you're right." Graham looked at his wife and saw exactly what he had been waiting for. A woman finally worn down. A woman who understood that resisting him would only cost her more. A woman about to sign. That look of quiet triumph told Claire the game had reached a point of no return. Graham was no longer cautious. Patricia neither. To them, she had returned to the role they needed her to play. Gentle, cooperative, faded, controllable. Only Noah was not fooled. When Claire stood and asked to take him outside for some air, Noah held onto her hand tighter than usual. On the back patio, the wind moved through the garden, carrying the scent of dry oak leaves and distant salt water. Noah looked up, his voice so soft it almost dissolved in the air. "Mom, are we going to have to leave the house?" The question tore through every layer of defense Claire had built that morning. She knelt down to his level. Noah's face had gone pale with worry, his eyes wide with a fear no child should carry. Maybe he had overheard something at the table about property. Maybe it was just instinct, a child too attuned to the shifting ground beneath adults. Claire placed her hands gently on his cheeks, warm and steady. "We're going to have a new place," she said. "Smaller, but quieter. A place where we can breathe." Noah did not ask anything else. He simply nodded, then leaned his head against her shoulder. The gesture was light, but to Claire, it felt like the final reminder that she could not afford to delay any longer. 3 days later, she signed a lease on a small townhouse in Mount Pleasant. It was not beautiful in the way magazines would feature. 2 bedrooms, a narrow staircase, a kitchen just wide enough to turn around, a tiny backyard barely large enough for a small table and 2 potted plants. But the light there was real. Noah's window looked out over a row of low maple trees and a patch of grass where children could kick a ball in the late afternoon. The new school was closer. The park was closer. And most importantly, there was no locked office upstairs, no stranger's perfume lingering on a husband's collar, no Patricia stepping through the doorway like the true owner of Claire's life. When the agent left, Claire stood in the empty living room, listening to the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic. A strange feeling moved through her chest. Not quite happiness, not quite sadness. More like the moment someone finally steps out of a suffocating room, stands under the open sky, and realizes they had forgotten what clean air felt like. That night, when Graham came home and asked, with a trace of impatience, whether she was ready to finalize things, Claire looked at him for a moment longer than usual, then said softly that she would likely sign soon. Graham smiled. He did not know that Claire had just secured the place that would carry her and Noah out of his life. He also did not know that his smile was making page 41 of the agreement heavier by the second. 3 weeks later, the morning of the final hearing arrived, with a kind of cold, sharp sunlight that felt almost cruel. Charleston still carried the scent of wet leaves and sea salt from the night's rain. Claire woke before her alarm and lay still for a few seconds in the small townhouse in Mount Pleasant, listening to Noah shift in the next room and to the faint rattle of pipes inside the walls. This was the morning when her entire old life would finally be forced to call itself by its true name. Not a broken love story. Not a marriage that simply failed, but a whole system of lies at last made to bear its own weight. She put on the outfit she had set out the night before: a white blouse, a light gray blazer, dark tailored trousers. No jewelry except the hummingbird brooch from her aunt. It was so small no one else would notice it, but to Claire it felt like a fragment of memory, a reminder that some creatures are far less fragile than they seem. When she stopped by Noah's room, he was still half asleep, his hair mussed, the imprint of the pillow still on his cheek. Claire bent down to kiss him and told him that this afternoon the two of them would get ice cream, just like she promised. Noah nodded and hugged his stuffed dinosaur a little tighter, not understanding why his mother seemed calmer than the moment required. Children always sense important days, long before they know what to call them. Jenna picked Noah up at the end of the street before school. When Jenna's car pulled away, Claire stood on the curb for one more beat, looking at the child seat through the back window, and felt her heart tugged in that direction, as if a string had been tied to it. Then she got into her own car. Monica had already texted, "I'm at the courthouse. Everything's ready." Charleston Family Court was not imposing, but it had the indifferent air of places that had witnessed too many endings to be moved by any one of them. Hallways washed in fluorescent light, polished tile floors, the sound of shoes turning pages, the low murmur of lawyers who were used to breaking people apart into clauses. Claire passed through security, strangely aware that her palms were dry. Years ago she would have thought this was the moment she should be afraid. Now she understood that the real fear was behind her, buried in all those nights she had slept beside a man who could drag her name into debt and still sleep soundly. Monica was waiting outside the courtroom, her brown and silver hair neat, the case files tucked close against her body like an extension of her arm. She asked only one question. "Ready?" Claire nodded. Monica studied her closely. There was a final measure in her eyes, the look of someone who never steps into battle without testing how steady her ally is. Then she opened the door. Graham was already there. He sat at the opposite table in a flawless charcoal suit, his navy pocket square folded with the kind of arrogant precision that reminded everyone he still believed everything in life was a matter of presentation. Victor Lang sat beside him, a thick file spread in front of him. From a distance, Victor still looked professionally composed, but Claire saw exactly what Monica had once said other people would miss. His jaw was slightly tighter. His fingers turned the pages less evenly than usual. He did not smell the trap, but he had already begun to feel that the ground beneath him was no longer entirely level. In the back row, Patricia Whitmore sat straight-backed in a pale cream suit, the pearl at her ear catching the light with quiet elegance. She had come here the way one might attend a ceremony, carrying the certainty of someone who believed the order of the world had always tilted in her family's favor. Beside her sat Sabrina Vale, in a deep red dress, flawless lipstick, her phone already resting on her lap. She tried to look relaxed, but her eyes kept flicking toward Graham, as if she needed constant reassurance that her new role was about to be made official. When Claire stepped inside, Sabrina smiled, a smile that came close to pity. Patricia gave only the faintest nod, the kind reserved for someone who had finally accepted where she truly belonged. And Graham looked at Claire and saw exactly what he wanted to see. A woman dressed simply, with no glamorous support system behind her, there to sign away her losses wrapped in polite legal language. In his mind, this morning was just procedure. The final procedure, before he reclaimed the clean surface he needed to move on to a new life, new capital, a new image. The judge entered on time. She was a woman in her 60s, her gray hair pinned back neatly, her voice dry and exact as a ruler's edge. No one entered her courtroom expecting comfort. The hearing began. The clerk read the final settlement into the record. Each item left her mouth in an even, cold, impartial tone. The townhouse in the historic district. The black Range Rover. full control of Whitmore Hospitality Group, ownership interests in the seafood restaurant, the wine bar, the wedding venue, the licenses, the wine collection, the related accounts. Each word sounded like a brick being laid into the statue Graham had built of himself. Sabrina sat a little straighter after every item. Patricia folded her hands over her small handbag, her satisfaction becoming more and more visible. Graham was nearly smiling. Claire remained still. The judge turned to her first. You understand that by signing this agreement, you waive any claim to the division of the assets just listed. I understand, Claire replied. You have reviewed this agreement with your attorney? I have. You have no further questions? No, Your Honor. Everything unfolded exactly as Graham had wanted. Fast, clean, smooth enough that he began to relax completely. That was the fatal error of people who are used to winning before the real game even begins. They stop reading other people's faces. They stop listening for strange sounds in the room. They hear only the voice of their own arrogance. Then the judge looked at Graham. Mr. Whitmore, according to the record, you were given full opportunity to conduct an independent financial review of all assets and related liabilities before signing. Do you still wish to waive that right? Victor Lang leaned in, only slightly. Maybe he was about to say something. Maybe he only wanted to buy one more second to re-examine the discomfort he had felt without being able to name it. But Graham stole the moment from him. I waive it, Your Honor, he said firmly. I built this business. No one understands its value better than I do. Monica did not move. Claire did not move. Only Victor turned his head slightly toward his client. In his mind, one last warning signal flickered faintly and went dark. Graham had answered in front of the judge. Every safe way back had narrowed at once. The judge nodded. Then sign the waiver on the corresponding page. Victor handed him the pen, a black Mont Blanc, glossy and expensive. Graham took it and flipped through the papers with the impatience of a man who only wanted to reach the last line as quickly as possible. He signed the waiver. Then he kept turning pages. He did not slow down at the appendices. He did not pause at the assumption of liabilities clause. He did not look up at Victor even as his lawyer's breathing began to grow shallower. He simply signed. The strokes were decisive, confident, elegant, exactly the signature of a man who had always believed his name carried value all on its own. Then he finished. A beat of silence fell across the room. Not a long one, but long enough for Victor Lang to snatch the file back and flip through several pages with fingers that were no longer entirely steady. His eyes stopped on a paragraph. The color drained visibly from his face. Not the panic of someone who had just been blindsided. It was the whiteness of a man who realized that every fact had been there from the beginning, and only his client had driven straight through them like a car racing through fog. Graham frowned. What is it? Victor did not answer at once. That was the second mistake of the morning. That one pause was enough to pull every eye in the room toward him. Patricia leaned forward. Sabrina set her phone down. The judge looked up from the file. Monica was the last to move. She simply placed one fingertip on the exact place she had been waiting for weeks. Page 41, Your Honor. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the air like a blade. Graham snatched the file from Victor's hand and turned back, his eyes racing over the legal language he had not even bothered to read moments earlier. Claire watched her future ex-husband's face change in stages. Confidence dissolved first, then irritation, then emptiness, and finally real horror, when the meaning of the words began to settle in. The party receiving the full assets listed above shall also assume all financial liabilities, existing and arising, directly or indirectly connected to those assets, including but not limited to commercial debt, tax obligations, personal guarantees, mortgages, accounts payable, disputes, and related costs incurred. Graham jerked his head up. What does that mean? Monica answered before the judge could. It means you receive everything you asked for, along with the full weight of what it actually is. From the back row, Sabrina let out a sound that hovered somewhere between shock and fear. Patricia went rigid, her hand gripping the handle of her purse until her knuckles turned white. Victor closed his eyes for a second, perhaps the brief private moment of a lawyer realizing his expertise had just been defeated by his own client's ego. Graham shot to his feet. No, that can't be right. This is fraud. The judge struck her gavel once, sharp and hard. Sit down, Mr. Whitmore. He did not sit. His face had gone pale, and for the first time his eyes no longer carried that familiar light of control. He looked at Monica, then at Claire. At last he understood. Not everything, only enough to realize that this morning had never belonged to him. Claire remained seated, both hands resting on the table, her expression so calm it was almost ruthless. And that was the moment the room tilted fully toward the truth. No one in the courtroom could remain inside their old role anymore. Graham was the first to break out of the shape he had preserved for so many years. The confidence that had once coated him like the glossy finish on an expensive wooden table began to crack away in pieces. He was still standing, one hand gripping the edge of the table, the file spread open in front of him like some creature that had turned back to bite the very person who fed it. For a few seconds, Graham tried to pull himself together with the voice of a man who had always believed that if he spoke with enough certainty, reality itself would have to back down. He said he did not understand. He said Victor needed to explain. He said that clearly this could not possibly be what the clause really meant. But legal language does not tremble the way people do. The judge looked at Graham over the rim of her glasses, which sat low on her nose. She did not raise her voice. She did not soften either. She simply stated that the full financial disclosure had been attached to the record, that Graham's side had been given every opportunity to conduct an independent review, that Graham himself had just confirmed in open court that he was waiving that right. The court had no obligation to protect an adult from the consequences of refusing to read what he signed. The sentence landed briefly, but it ended every last pocket of ambiguity. Victor Lang sat frozen. In his mind, the question was no longer who had set the trap. He was skilled enough to know there had been no trap here, not in any legal sense. There was only a complete, transparent agreement, drafted by people who understood exactly what they were doing, and a client too arrogant to believe anything could stop him, as long as he moved fast enough on the momentum of his own ego. The feeling was worse than being deceived. It was the feeling of watching a crash happen and being unable to make the driver hit the brakes in time. In the back row, Sabrina was the first to lose color in her face. The red lipstick was still there, but the face beneath it had changed. She did not understand every legal term. She did not need to. Just seeing Graham panic was enough to tell her that everything he had ever promised her about the assets, the investments, the future by the harbor, the new house, the European trips, was shaking like a stage backdrop that had just been kicked from behind. Sabrina looked at Patricia as if hoping the older woman would deny everything with one firm sentence. But Patricia only sat there, very straight, chin lifted, shoulders rigid inside her cream suit. She was the kind of woman who could endure humiliation with perfect posture for a few final minutes before walking out. Claire watched all of it and felt no joy. There is a kind of victory that leaves people lightheaded. This was not that kind. It felt more like watching an old, rotten house finally collapse after years of cracked walls. You do not cheer. You only know that at least now, no one has to keep pretending it was safe. Graham turned sharply toward Claire. You knew from the beginning. This time he no longer spoke to her with the tone of someone granting favors. He no longer had the calm ease of a man dividing property. For the first time, there was real fear in his eyes. Not fear of humiliation. Fear of falling. Fear that the emptiness he had filled with debt, lies, and successful performances had suddenly opened beneath his feet. Claire looked at her husband carefully. The man who had once made her weigh every word before speaking in her own kitchen. The father who had treated Noah like a secondary obligation tucked around his schedule. Sabrina's perfect lover, Patricia's golden son. All of those versions were cracking apart at once now, revealing a man far smaller than the image he had worked so hard to build. I knew you wanted everything, Claire said. I just let you have exactly what you chose. Her voice was not loud, but the calm in it made the words cut deeper than any scream ever could. Graham took half a step back as if he had been slapped. Patricia was the first to stand, not to defend her son, not to challenge the judge. She simply picked up her handbag, adjusted one shoulder of her jacket, and walked straight to the door with stiff, quick steps, as if leaving the room soon enough might still allow her to preserve a scrap of dignity. Sabrina watched her go, then looked at Graham one more time. Inside her mind, the final terrible pieces had clicked into place. There was no new house, no polished, luxurious life waiting for her. Only a man buried in debt who had just signed his own noose tighter. She rose too, slower than Patricia, a little unsteady from the shock and her heels, then drifted past Graham without touching him. Claire heard Sabrina's heels strike the tile floor of the hallway, each step quicker than the one before. The sound gave Claire no satisfaction. It only confirmed that everything Graham had built out of illusion was collapsing in exactly the order it had been built. The hearing ended not long after that. The judge finalized the terms in her dry voice. The clerk gathered the documents, and Monica snapped her briefcase shut like someone who had completed precisely the task she had been hired to do. It was not until Claire stood up that her knees softened slightly. Not because of regret, simply because the human body sometimes needs a few minutes after battle to understand what it has just survived. Out in the hallway, the scene was even worse than it had been inside the courtroom. Sabrina stopped Graham near the tall glass windows overlooking the parking lot. She could no longer hold on to the elegant composure she wore so easily at parties. Her voice broke, high and sharp. So there's no money, no house, no investors you can count on. Everything you told me was a lie. Graham grabbed her wrist with the reflex of a drowning man snatching at a piece of wood. Sabrina yanked herself free, her face twisting as if she had touched something dirty. There was no love left in her eyes, not even the thrill of victory. Only disgust at realizing she had placed her future inside a hollow shell. Monica stood beside Claire, watching the scene with professional coldness. She had seen men shout, women faint, families fall apart on upholstered hallway benches outside courtrooms. But even she had to admit that a collapse this complete was rare. Claire said nothing. She simply stood there, feeling as though the noise around her was slowly receding into the distance. Then Graham saw her. For one moment he looked as though he wanted to come toward her, maybe to beg, maybe to accuse, maybe only to hold on to someone who had once known the version of him he used to be. But Claire turned away first. At the far end of the hallway was the exit, where sunlight poured in as a hard white strip. She walked toward it at an even pace, not fast, without looking back. Monica walked beside her for a few more steps, then stopped to handle the final paperwork. When the glass doors opened, wind carrying salt from the harbor swept across Claire's face. In that moment, she felt something deep inside her chest break loose. not in pain, in the way a final clasp suddenly springs open. 3 months later, the rest of the Whitmore empire began to collapse along the slope that had been there all along. Jenna told Claire the story in fragments during their meetings at the old coffee shop. First, the wine suppliers tightened credit. Then one of the properties was hit with back taxes and temporarily frozen. The wedding venue started losing bookings one after another because rumor spread faster than any image recovery campaign. The Range Rover was repossessed on a foggy morning, right before a few of Graham's former employees came to clear out the office. The townhouse was eventually put on the market. It sold for less than what was needed to cover the loss. Whitmore Hospitality Group slid from restructuring into liquidation. Graham tried to keep up appearances for as long as he could. He made calls, met with investors, sent explanatory emails, wore the old suits, used the old smile, spoke in the old voice. But once gravity changes direction, no amount of charm can fight arithmetic. In the end, he took a much smaller job at a regional restaurant management company, the kind of job where he had to report to people younger than himself and where no one called him founder anymore. Claire listened to all of it with a calm that made Jenna look at her longer than usual. "Don't you feel satisfied?" Jenna asked her once. Claire looked through the window, where a few customers in light jackets crossed the street carrying takeaway coffee. She thought about Noah at baseball practice, thought about the small townhouse with the narrow kitchen, but real laughter inside it. Thought about the first time she paid the full rent herself with money she had earned. "No," she said. "I just feel like everything finally stopped forcing me to pretend." Claire's new life did not arrive like fireworks. It arrived like morning light slipping into a room that had been covered for too long by heavy curtains. Lydia Monroe helped bring her back into full-time work in the finance department of a hotel group. At first, it was a mid-level analyst position. Then, sooner than expected, Claire was handed more difficult, messier problems, the kind that required a mind able to spot fractures before they turned into crisis. She did the work well without needing to make a show of it. In much the same way, she had survived. Noah changed schools. For the first few weeks, he was still cautious, clinging to his mother more than usual, startling when adults raised their voices in grocery stores. But little by little, the color returned to his eyes. He made new friends. He had a baseball coach who remembered his name. There were evenings when he sat at the small dining table, reading aloud without stumbling nearly as much as before. One day, while Claire was washing dishes, Noah ran in from the backyard, cheeks flushed pink from the wind, and shouted that the new house sounded more like a real home than the old one ever had. The childish honesty of it made Claire turn her face away for a moment, because it was true. Home is not the place with chandeliers and expensive stone countertops. Home is the place where a child does not have to listen for the sound of an engine outside and guess what kind of mood the adults are in. One early summer afternoon, after work, Claire sat on a wooden bench at the park near the house and watched Noah practice throwing. The last light of day poured a honey-colored glow over his shoulders. Children's laughter floated faintly across the grass. Claire's phone buzzed. It was an email from the Advanced Finance Certification program she had quietly applied to a few weeks earlier. She had been accepted. Claire looked at the screen, then lifted her eyes to her son running across the field, tripping over the grass, laughing at his own fall without a trace of embarrassment. A strange feeling passed through her. Not triumph, not simple relief. It was the kind of happiness that does not need anyone's permission. The life Graham and his family had once treated like a supporting role had risen to its feet on its own. And this time, it no longer carried the name Whitmore. Autumn came to Charleston with a softer, thinner light, as if the whole city had learned how to lower its voice after a summer that had been too full. In the small townhouse in Mount Pleasant, Claire had begun to settle into her new rhythm of life so completely that sometimes its quietness startled her. Mornings smelled like toast and coffee. Afternoons were filled with the sound of Noah throwing a ball against the backyard wall and running to retrieve it with the serious concentration of a little boy who believed every throw mattered. Evenings meant homework, a sink with a few dishes in it, and a laptop open on the dining table with spreadsheets Claire actually wanted to look at, not numbers she had once been forced to ignore. That peace was fragile, in the way all precious things are fragile. And perhaps that was why, when Claire's phone lit up one Tuesday afternoon in early October with the name Graham Whitmore on the screen, the entire kitchen seemed to go still for a beat. The message was short. "I need to talk to you. About Noah." Claire stared at the screen. In the first second, her body reacted before reason could step in. Her shoulders tightened, her breathing went shallow. An old muscle memory rose up in her, the kind that had once made every notification from Graham carry the feeling of a demand, an order, or a fresh disappointment. But then the sensation receded faster than she expected. Not because the memory was gone, but because Claire no longer lived in the place where it had the power to control her. She did not reply right away. That night, after Noah had fallen asleep, Claire took her phone outside and sat in the wicker chair on the back porch. The wind carried the smell of damp grass and the faint taste of salt from the harbor. The porch light from the house next door cast a warm yellow glow across the fence, making everything look gentler than it really was. Claire read the message again. There was none of Graham's old self-importance in it, no command, not even the false softness he used to wear when he wanted someone to bend. It was just one short sentence. She texted back, "If this is about Noah, we meet in public. Tomorrow at noon, the coffee shop on West Ashley." Graham replied almost immediately, "Okay." Claire did not sleep deeply that night, not because she was afraid the past was coming back, but because she understood that there are some meetings you cannot avoid forever if you truly want to leave the past behind without dragging it on your back. Forgiveness and going back had never been the same thing. She had learned that at too high a cost. The next day, Graham arrived a few minutes before she did. Claire recognized him at once, but not in the old way. The tailored suits were gone. The bright, cold watch was gone too. Graham wore dark khakis, a navy polo, and a light jacket over it. His clothes were clean and neat, but the sharply constructed edge that used to make people look up at him was no longer there. He had visibly lost weight. Not the kind of weight loss that comes from working out or trying to live healthier, but the kind that happens when life itself finally scrapes away the excess. His jaw looked more pronounced. His eyes were more hollow. There were a few more strands of gray at his temples. When Claire stepped into the cafe, Graham stood up out of old reflex. Then he stopped halfway, as if he himself was no longer sure how much politeness he still had the right to offer her. Claire sat down across from him, ordered hot tea, and waited for him to speak first. Graham looked at her for a long time. "You look well," he said at last. Claire did not offer him any matching courtesy in return. She simply said, straight and clear, "You said this was about Noah." A year earlier, Graham would have bristled at that kind of brevity. He would have tried to pull the conversation back onto ground where he could control its rhythm and tone. Not today. He lowered his eyes to his hands for a moment, as if he had to relearn how to hold a sentence with the proper weight. "I've been in therapy for almost a year," he said. "Not right after the trial. At first, I thought I just needed to sort out the finances, find a job, get back on my feet. But then I realized what was broken didn't begin with money." Claire stayed silent, not to encourage him and not to stop him, only to let him keep walking, if he truly had somewhere to go. "I was a bad husband," Graham said, his voice drawing out by the end of the sentence. And I was an even worse father. I thought if I made enough money, opened enough places, kept the right image intact, everything else would just fall into place on its own. And when things started cracking, I only tightened my grip harder. I treated you like you didn't need to know the truth. And I treated Noah like he would always be there, waiting until I had time. Claire listened, and her chest did not ache the way she once imagined it would if one day Graham ever said these things aloud. Maybe it was because she had already cried everything out for the version of herself that had needed those words far too long ago. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. Graham looked up. For the first time since Claire had sat down, he met her eyes without that layer of defense in between. "Because I want to see Noah," he said. "Not to prove anything, not to take anything back from you. I just want the chance to try to do my part the right way, if it isn't too late beyond repair." Claire sat still. Outside the window, people walked past the cafe with paper bags, light jackets, and their own small private lives. Inside, the coffee grinder screeched and then fell quiet. The silence between them was no longer the silence of the marriage they used to have. It was the space where one person was waiting to be judged, and the other, for the first time, did not need to make a decision to protect herself, but to protect her son. Claire thought of Noah. She thought of those evenings when he sat with a book in his hands, waiting for the sound of his father's car. She thought of the drawing where his father had been nothing more than a shadow at the edge of the page. She thought of how, in recent months, Noah had mentioned Graham less and less, not because anyone had forbidden it, but because the child had finally understood that some empty spaces are not worth continuing to fill with hope. She also thought of something the therapist had once said. Children do not necessarily need a perfect father, but they do need adults who tell the truth, keep their word, and do not make them pay for the chaos of grown-ups. "If Noah sees you," Claire said slowly, "everything will happen on my terms." Graham nodded immediately, too quickly, like a man who knew he was no longer in any position to bargain. "Then listen carefully," Claire continued. "First, you stay in therapy consistently, and there has to be verification. Second, you keep steady work for at least another 6 months. Third, if you do see Noah, it starts with short visits, supervised, and it only moves forward if he feels safe. And the last condition, the one that can never be broken, you will not speak badly about me in front of our son, not directly, not indirectly, and not through the kind of silence that forces a child to wonder whether his mother is the problem." Each condition Claire laid down landed on the table like a stone being set into the proper place in the foundation of her new life. Not as revenge, not as a warning, but as a reminder to both of them that boundaries are not punishment. Boundaries are the architecture of peace. Graham listened, then nodded again, this time more slowly. "I agree." Claire looked at him, searching his tired face for any trace of the old slipperiness. It might still have been there somewhere. People do not change after a few therapy sessions or a single year of losing everything. But she saw something else, too. A ruin that had finally been forced to know it was a ruin. And sometimes that is the only beginning that truly matters. She stood first. "I'm not promising you anything except that I will watch," Claire said. "The rest is in what you do, not what you say." Graham stood too, but he did not try to touch her. He did not ask for another chance, did not invoke the old years, did not name what was already dead. He only gave a small nod. "Thank you." Claire left the cafe and stepped into the sunlight, feeling a door inside her close very softly without making a sound. Not the door between her and Graham. That door had really closed the day the trial ended. This was the door between her and the part of her past that had once made her believe that being kind meant leaving herself open forever for other people to walk in and trample her. That night, after Noah had gone to sleep, Claire opened the light brown leather journal she always wrote in whenever she needed to put the world back in order inside her own mind. Outside on the porch, the wind stirred through the low branches. The house was quiet. No heavy footsteps on the stairs, no doors slamming shut, no phone turned face down too quickly. She wrote slowly, one word at a time. Boundaries are not walls that keep people out of your life. Boundaries are doors. You choose who gets to walk through them. And how. Claire set down her pen and looked at the words while the ink was still wet. Then she thought of the woman she had been 3 years ago, the one who had once stood outside a locked door, afraid she would learn the truth too late. The one who had mistaken silence for peace. The one who had believed her worth needed someone else's confirmation before it could become real. She wished she could hold that woman and tell her that one day would come when she would no longer need anyone to choose her. Not a grand house, not a prestigious family name through marriage, not a man coming back with an apology to make her life mean something. She would rebuild it all herself, with things smaller, truer, stronger. The next morning, Noah came running into the kitchen with one sock twisted sideways and asked if he could have pancakes for breakfast because he had a spelling test that day. Claire laughed, rolled up her sleeves, and took the flour out of the cabinet. Sunlight poured golden across the stone countertop. Noah sat there swinging his legs and practicing the difficult words out loud in a voice that stumbled far less than it had a year earlier. Life was not radiant in the way people photograph for magazines, but it was full of things that were real, and Claire knew that realness was what kept people from drowning. There are wounds that do not bleed, but still take years to teach a person how to stand again. Claire did not win through noise, and not through revenge, but through something far harder, holding on to her self-respect and creating a place of real peace for her son. Sometimes walking away is not losing. Sometimes letting go of something rotten is the only way to save yourself. And maybe what makes this story stay with people is not the twist in the courtroom, but the moment a woman finally realizes that her worth does not need to be handed to her by anyone. If this story made you think, leave a comment and share how it made you feel, or tell us which moment stayed with you the most. In your opinion, what was the strongest thing Claire did? And do not forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you can stay with us for more stories about marriage, self-respect, boundaries, and the journey of standing up after heartbreak. And remember this: there are days when it feels like you are losing everything, when in truth, that is the day life begins returning you to your real worth.